We have Miss Amy. Now, Amy, she is a senior management in charge of senior management engagement. And so she's going to be talking to us about cultivating a culture of learning to increase engagement. So right now, in case if you haven't heard, we are constantly trying to attract new talent, but at the same time, we're trying to keep the talent that we already have. And by training our talent and by upskilling our talent, it's really a powerful and simple way for us to not only increase our retention of the talent that we have, but it's also a great opportunity to upskill and to stay relevant. I was telling someone the other day, we were speaking about sports, and I said, I can only imagine spending a lot of time and money as a owner of a professional sports team to hire the best talent in the world and to pay them the highest salaries and then never go to practice. Eventually, at first, the team will probably do just fine. They have existing talent, they have raw talent, and they have a very high salary, so they're well taken care of there. And for the first few matches, they'll probably do just fine. For the first few games, they're going to do just fine. But as time goes on, those skills will begin to wane. And the other teams that are continuously going to practice and are continuously building their skills, eventually they're going to go up on top. And so having the best raw talent and even paying them the most alone is not the way that we establish that competitive advantage and stay competitive within our teams. It's important that we are intentional to continuously build our skills. And so we are going to learn some practical knowledge on how we can do that from Miss Amy. So again, Amy is here today. She's going to be sharing with us how we can cultivate that culture of learning to increase engagement. So thank you so much, Amy. It is wonderful to have you here with us.
Thanks, Amber. I appreciate that. All right, let's get started. I'll share out a screen here. Let's pick the right one. There we go. All right, everyone. Thank you for being here this morning. I'm very excited to join you. My name is Amy Tessitore, and I'm the Senior Manager of Engagement at Open LMS. I am joining you this morning from what we call upstate New York. I am located about 3 hours north of New York City, where it is a very cloudy and rainy fall day. That seems to have been our pattern for pretty much the whole summer and into fall. Today, we're going to talk a bit about cultivating a culture of learning to increase engagement. And I know that when we talk about this, we often frequently hear about engagement in terms of how do we gear that towards students and not as much for the corporate environment. So today, we're going to focus on some of those very corporate training, HR related, specific related nuances to making sure that we've created this culture of learning in our organization. Going too fast. So some of the key points that we're going to talk about today are we're going to explore what the current professional landscape looks like, what we've discovered over the past year, and what we'll take with us moving forward. Most of what we're hearing right now is being presented to people in terms of how we had to pivot for COVID. But the reality is a lot of these things were in motion prior to us having to take things online. So we'll talk about what we learned over the past year to help us move forward with those goals and with those changes we were already making. We'll go through some of the current strategies and approaches to supporting your workforce with your learning programs. And those programs can be very specific or different between organizations, but the strategies and approaches are very similar. And then I'll talk about some tools and strategies that can help you track and improve learner engagement in your courses. And then just also how to improve that engagement, a few little things that we can share with you. So as I mentioned, my name is Amy Tessitore, and I'm a Senior Manager of Engagement Services. I also focus heavily on our education side to our business. So I do a lot of training myself and operate an academy where we have clients and non-clients who come in and take courses with us. I've been in the education and ed tech sector for about 15 years, working in all aspects of education from preschool all the way up through corporate training and everything in between. So I've been in a lot of different areas. I started as a client care analyst at eThink Education, which meant that I was working individually with clients to make sure that they were successful. After we were acquired, I moved into my current role. And some areas of my expertise where I tend to focus heavily professionally are accessible and inclusive learning design, presence and engagement, and then also learning management, site administration. And a little about me, I'm a mom of two boys. One is a footballer, which we call soccer here, but it's football everywhere else in the world. And one plays baseball. I am a chef, chauffeur, medic, and a dog mom. So that's pretty much what my life looks like on a daily basis, the work and the home pieces. So let's look at what that current e-learning technology landscape looks like. And when we talk about e-learning, we're talking about any type of training or learning or education that we're putting online. And this particular survey was specific to corporations. And what we found in this survey question, they're asking, what is your organization's learning ecosystem? So what is it that you're using to create that culture, to create that learning ecosystem? And 53% of people said they were using a learning management system. Obviously, that's the business that we're in over here at Open LMS. We host and manage learning management systems, but that does seem to be the way that many places are going. They're moving away from that face-to-face physical training structure and putting a lot of things online and finding that learning management systems are very helpful for that. 40% of respondents are using a learning hub or portal. And so I have worked in a place where this was the case. We would log into this intranet place and there was lots of resources there. And that's what we were using. Some are using social learning. There is an increasing reliance and trend toward virtual or augmented reality, particularly when we're talking about skills-based training. So when we need someone to do something, a skill that they would have to demonstrate, and we can't put them in that real environment, or it doesn't make sense to do so, VR and AR are really important there. And then you can see things start to trickle down: performance support systems, learning content management systems, which is where we're just putting the content in there and not doing a whole lot else with it. Authoring tools, and authoring tools are things like SCORM, which I know is frequently used, where you can create a package, put almost a whole course into a single learning package. Learning experience platforms, credentialing, and learning record store. So you'll see here that this doesn't add up to 100%. And that is because many organizations are using more than one of these, which makes sense. People may be using credentialing and a learning management system and bringing in some AR and VR. The learning ecosystem as a whole is really a collection of all different types of ed tech tools that can foster learning. The LMS tends to be central to that because almost everything else that you see here can connect to an LMS. And so having that centralized hub is pretty important to people. But you can see that there are different things. Gamification is coming in, virtual reality, plagiarism tools are actually making their way into the corporate environment as well. Simulation is becoming a big part of corporate training. But all of these things actually connect together to create a wider e-learning ecosystem, meaning that when you bring them all together, or you bring some of them together, you can create a really strong place for people to go in and learn. And when we have a place that's very supportive and inclusive and dynamic, we start to build that culture of learning. It becomes apparent to our employees that learning and teaching and always learning more on the job is very important to the company. So this next survey question asks, what is the primary weakness of your learning system? So we saw before people explained what learning systems they were using. And in this one, we asked them, well, what's the big weakness there? And 29% of people said it was the poor ability to integrate with other systems. And last week, I was actually polling some people and it came back again. And in that poll, we had more than 58% of people say the poor ability of their current system to integrate with other systems, such as their HR system, didn't integrate with their learning platform, and they couldn't bring in third-party authoring tools. There's also the limited collaboration functionality. So can groups collaborate within the learning ecosystem there? And is it customizable? Does it lack search depth? These are all really important things to think about when we're talking about creating that culture, because when we talk about creating a culture of learning, it means that everything is interconnected. Everything is viewed as equally as important and that everything intertwines. So a culture is often hard to change, but once you can get it set up and you really convey that, by doing some of these things or fixing some of these things, you're well on your way to improving some of the response and engagement with your training programs. So how do we actually do that? You hear me keep talking about cultivating a culture of learning. So here are 6 tenets of creating that culture. There are many more, and there are pieces to these. These each have kind of subsections that are apply as well. So the first is that learning needs to be a core organizational value. So we can say that we want our employees to learn and that, training and teaching and learning is a very important part of our culture. But if it's not a core organizational value, no one will buy into that. So we need to have strong and visible leadership support. And that means that our leaders need to be participating in our corporate learning as well. There should be job and growth coaching as part of this culture of learning, meaning that I'm able to, I'm working with the different people coming through my training or teaching and learning programs, and I am helping them. I'm being specific. We're talking about the fact that we want to coach people. If there are troubles that they're having, we want them to be able to come to us. We don't want people to, suffer in silence, so to speak. So when learning is a core organizational value, everyone is part of that learning environment from leadership all the way down. And there's an open door policy, but we're also all working to continue to grow each other's strengths, help each other address our weaknesses. And that's that job and growth coaching. Part of doing that is creating personalized learning paths. And so we can make learning relevant to individual users. And that sounds a lot more daunting than it actually is. If we're using the right platforms and the right software, we can actually start to build job profiles, and we can have some specific skills related to those or training that's related to them. And when we do that, we can create a learning path, but we can personalize it for individuals. Perhaps one person has areas they need to develop more than others. We can do this. We can make it personal, so unique to that person's situation. And it enables employees to see the value in the training because they can very clearly see where they're going to grow and how they're going to grow along the way. If people understand the how and the why behind something, it brings more value to that something. So when we create learning that has value and we create these learning paths that have value and they are directly correlated back to an individual person and they can see why this is important, they're going to be more invested and value that learning. We also want to individualize our career coaching. So sometimes we think, okay, we're going to work on these people because they have leadership skills and we want to move them to leadership roles. That's very broad and general. But you may identify someone and say, this person has strong leadership potential as it relates to, and there's something very specific, and you have a pretty good idea in mind of where they might fit well. When we start to individualize that career coaching, we can identify very specific employee career goals with individuals so that they know exactly what's expected of them, where they're heading, and what they're working toward. This does help to promote some self-effective learning, because if I just say to someone, I'd like to mentor you into a leadership role, too broad. They don't know how to go out and find the resources and start to hone their own skills. But if we say to someone, I really would like to career coach you toward this role as a training leader who focuses on a specific area. When you start to break that down and give very clear, concise goals for this training, people can self-effectively learn. They can go out, they'll find more information about things, they'll get more invested, and they'll see that career development is linked to learning, which is a corporate value, and it has value to them personally. We need to set the example. So, like I said above, leadership is a core organizational value. So, we have to walk the walk, and that means that we have to set the example. In a culture of learning, all leadership engages in ongoing learning. So they demonstrate that persona of a lifelong learner. They are out attending and finding conference opportunities so that they can learn more. They're networking. They are, taking those refresher courses on things like, I don't know, office or the learning management system or things that they've been doing for a long time, but they're setting the stage and they're showing everyone that learning is important for everyone. Learning isn't just important for those people that are newer into the organization that we want to move along the track. It's important to everyone. Leaders also need to set their own learning goals. And so, obviously, if I'm a leader, maybe there's not someone above me who helps me set those goals, but I should start to set them. As a leader, I should demonstrate enough ownership into my learning path that I can create some of my own learning goals. Then, as I'm creating those personalized learning paths and coaching people under me, I can help encourage them to begin writing some of their own learning goals. I can discuss that. It's important to discuss the training you've been involved in. And I know that sometimes that doesn't happen in organizations. But if we start to spread the word about training we've been to and its impact on us and how exciting it was and why we're looking forward to it and it was meaningful to us, this does get people excited about something. Uh, a good example is, have you ever walked into a room and you don't know everyone there, but you meet someone for the first time and they start talking to you and they're telling you about something in their life and their enthusiasm just really projects, it comes through, and their excitement makes you excited about what they're talking about. That is what we're talking about here. When we start as leaders discussing the training that we've been involved in and really showing the passion and excitement behind it, we get others excited and invested. We also want to create an inclusive learning environment. And you'll remember when I introduced myself, I said that this is an area that I'm pretty passionate about, and that's true. Representation matters. When we're creating our learning materials and our learning experiences, it's very important that we are making sure that we are representing people of a variety of different cultures, backgrounds, and things like this. When people feel that they're represented in the learning environment, they are more likely to connect with that learning environment. And I think that it doesn't take a lot to figure out why that might be. But it's important to remember that not only are you teaching and training people with a variety of backgrounds, you need to have those variety of backgrounds represented in all of the material that you're putting out. Inclusive learning environments are much more conducive to engagement. And so that's an important factor to keep in mind. The other thing to think about is when you're running training courses, try to schedule those around cultural and religious holidays. It's important that we try to recognize that we shouldn't probably have training maybe on Sundays for some people or Fridays for other people, or this is, during the month of Ramadan, we shouldn't be holding training necessarily. We want to be mindful and respectful of the different cultures of the people who are working with us, that are learning with us. And when we're mindful and respectful, we do create that inclusive learning environment. We foster engagement, we foster respect, and in turn, that is what creates that positive culture. The other thing is to create a culture of knowledge sharing. If you've ever seen me speak before or you ever meet me, you will hear me probably say this. It is something I say frequently. We are not the keepers of knowledge. Our role is to help enable people and empower people to navigate through this learning environment. And so, whether that's helping them overcome previous barriers to being able to learn skills to move up, or just encouraging them, helping them to become self-effective learners so they know where to find information. That's our role. And when we create a culture of learning, it really is a culture of learning. It's not a culture of teaching. It's not a culture where we're telling you something because we know better than you. It really is truly a 360-degree learning environment, and that's for all of us. And so always keep in mind that we are not the keepers of knowledge. We should be the givers of what we know. If we know something, share it. There's no reason to keep it to ourselves. All right. Strategies for improving learner engagement. So now we've started to create the culture. We've gone through and we've said, we're going to put this emphasis on learning. It's going to be a key organizational goal. Our leadership is going to be out front, showing how important leading is, leading by example. We're going to create an inclusive environment. We are going to make sure that we are in a knowledge share place. So we have all of these pieces that need to come together to create the underlying culture. Now, what strategies do we bring into that culture to improve the learner engagement side of things? And this is often where it's hard, it's where things fall apart, particularly when we're talking about corporate environments. People are doing their everyday job, and then we want them to do some training and learning in addition to their normal everyday role. And sometimes that can be very hard for people to carve out that time. And so they have trouble engaging. So, some strategies that we'll talk about today are having that single point of access, making sure that you are in tune with mobile learning, integrating different tools, creating connections both with the different people in the learning environment and with the content itself, collaboration, and then if something is cost effective, sometimes that is important as well. So let's talk about that single access point, that centralized training. So, one place for resources, learning, assessment, and record keeping. So, what you're aiming for here is anywhere, anytime access that gives your participants flexibility. When people have to access a variety of different systems, they're less likely to engage in the learning. If they can come into one place and everything is there, they're more likely to come and participate in that learning that you have there. This works whether you're talking about fully remote, synchronous, or asynchronous training. So, a lot of what we're having to do in many places still is we can't have our full room, we're not as face to face, or we're recognizing that from a cost perspective, it doesn't actually make sense for us to continue face to face training. So, we're putting things online. And so, you can use the centralized system, whether you are totally remote and you're just putting the information in there and people are expected to work through it and take a test and move on at the end. Or you actually want to replicate what you would have had in your live training sessions. You can still do that in a single centralized system. You can support that face to face training that you may still be carrying on with resources in something like a learning management system, because you can still be meeting face to face for certain things, but have pre and post work and the final test all happening in the learning management system. And so you have one place to really house all of that information. And then you can use your face to face time for just the really important things that you have to do face to face. Often we had to then introduce the information before, and then we would go through the review of the information, and then we would go through the demonstrations, and then we would be done. We don't have to introduce everything ahead of time anymore during that face-to-face time. So we can make that face-to-face time shorter and more impactful. And by using a centralized system, we actually can integrate with third-party platforms and services. So you could populate all of the users, for example, in a learning management system with an integration to your HR system where you can pull people out and put them, create accounts from them. And the integration between the two can take people in your HR system, create accounts for them in the learning management system, enroll them in courses. All of these different things can happen there. And then records can be pushed back as well. But also, if you're using things like SCORM to teach people online or video or you name it, you can actually integrate a lot of those things with a centralized system so that people still are only coming to one place to access anything. So we need to create a training that's going to drive success. So no one likes to sit in a boring training. And these types of sessions are always tough because I'm talking about not being boring. And here I am across the world. I don't really have a lot of interactivity in this particular presentation, but we can still create education offerings to drive success. And there are three ways that we can really focus on some of that. And that's to create dynamic content, think about assessment, and then look at our reporting. So when we're creating dynamic content for our learners to create this culture of learning and engagement, we need to think about what that means. Historically, we're given lots of written stuff, all these policies and PDFs and books that we need to read and things. And that is fine. We can have some written content that's great for things like documents and policies, or if we want someone to read a case study, for example. But mix it up. Now you can do more. If you're using an online system, for example, or even if you aren't, even if you're face to face, bring in some video and audio options. Have people give testimonials and things like that that are related to that training. Make it interactive. If you're online, use a tool like H5P, which is a free content authoring tool that you can access right online. If you're interested, you can go to something called h5p.org. That's h5p.org. Sign up for a free account and see what you can build there. There's some great examples, but you can also make things interactive by using polls and having small meets and breakout groups and things. And that's true whether you're talking about putting something online or having something face to face. And I'll tell you one of my favorite tools that I like to use in face to face. Whenever I am giving a training, and that training means that it requires people to do some sort of decision making. So whether it's a training for people in the health profession and they actually have to talk about a patient scenario, or I'm training in teacher education and there's a scenario, or I'm training a group of electricians and there's a scenario. I can give that scenario to group A and they have to walk through the scenario, get to the end, figure out how they would have approached everything. Meanwhile, group B is watching all of this. And at the end, group A presents what they did and why they did it and how they got to the end. And group B gives a critique of only the process that group A followed. So they don't comment on what the end goal is, but the process that was followed. And that's called a fishbowl activity. And it works really well whenever I have to do any type of scenario. And I can do that both online or face to face. And that is a nice way to mix up some of that content that we are tending to give to people. And it makes it a truly immersive learning experience. The other thing we need to think about is assessment. Many times we need people to take a quiz or and achieve a certain score before they move on, before they've finished that training. So if we're using something like a learning management system or something like that, you can assess within that platform or connect to a third-party platform. You can use quizzes. And when you do quizzes, try to use a variety of question types. Don't just go with all the true false or all the multiple choice. Mix it up a little bit. Make those quiz questions a little bit more interesting. If you're using some sort of computer assisted testing platform or a learning management system or something like that, there should be an option to create quizzes within that have a variety of, and you can have a variety of different question types. And this matters because it gets people thinking in different ways. But you also may have the opportunity for people to not take a test. Perhaps they can submit something written or even a video of them presenting on something or explaining something. If we can't be all together, otherwise, maybe you can do some presentation time. It really depends on how you're mapping out that training. But when you can give people the opportunity to show you what they know in different ways, they're more likely to be engaged in that material. And I think for many of us, we might have a narrative about ourselves. I'm not a good test taker. I'm not a good paper writer. I am a good test taker. I'm a good paper writer. And when we think about that, we think about those times when we were in school and we hated certain classes because we knew we'd have to take all these tests, or we hated them because we knew it was all paper writing. That applies still to our corporate learning environment. Those things don't go away for people. They don't really change. So if you were someone who's never liked a test, you probably still don't like a test. So when you're creating those assessments for people to be able to demonstrate their knowledge and prove that the training was effective, think about mixing that up a little bit to help promote that engagement. Reporting is really important. And so we need to report not just on who's finished something and when they finished it, but the participation as a whole. Are people waiting until the last minute to come in and start this training? Are people doing it and getting it out of the way early? How quickly do people sign up? What are the completion statistics looking like? How frequently do we have to have a manager email or contact their employees to get them into the training and make sure it's done? Are we tracking and trending performance? So we should be doing that. We should be looking not just at who's completing, but how well are people performing? If we have been offering this training for a while and then we decided to make some changes to it because we felt like, there were new topics or new ways we could present it, what happened to performance when we made that change? It's important to track performance in terms of who's completing and how does this impact their job performance, but also how does that performance reflect upon the education that we've created? And this matters because it helps us to actually figure out, what does engagement look like? Are people truly engaged? Was there a change that we made that made people more likely to come to training and more likely to participate and finish it and perform well? And how can we roll that type of change out across the board to make our learning more engaging? And the other thing is, look for a system that has automatic renewal of annual programs. So if there are certain courses that people have to take every single year as part of working there, and I know here in the US, if you work, for example, in most corporate environments, you have to do things like there's like a sexual harassment training, there is an inclusion training, and there's usually one related to, not being bribed. So you can't, how to avoid getting bribed in the corporate environment. And usually you have to take these every single year. So save yourself the headache and think about having a system or looking for a system that actually will allow you to put all of those in an annual program for people, and it would automatically renew and automatically send out messages to people that they need to go back in and complete these things. There's a lot of technology out there to help you. And when you aren't bogged down in trying to just get the day-to-day operational pieces moving, it gives you more time to be engaged with the people who are taking the training and to think about developing different things and looking at whether or not this training is meeting your organizational goals. So the more you can automate, the better for you, and it actually gives you more time to be able to engage with people, which is really important and what we're trying to do here. Engagement is a two-way street. It's not just the people learning who we need to engage, it's the people. Everyone involved in every aspect of that training program needs to be fully engaged. So it's also important when we're creating training to standardize, share resources, and create consistency. So depending on, any type of training, if it's the first time you're going through it, the first time you arrive, it's like being dropped off in a city and you don't really know where you are and you don't have a map. You're not sure where to begin. If it's face to face, you don't know where to sit. You're not sure who's sitting where or how the day is necessarily going to roll out. If it's online, it's an even bigger hurdle because there isn't someone there to say, okay, we're going to start in 10 minutes. You can sit here. We'll have a break at such and such time. So it's important to standardize that experience for people so that after they have taken a training with you once, they know what that experience is like. They know what to expect. That helps to take some of the nerves out of things and make it easier for people to settle in quickly. Sharing resources is something else that's really important. So if I've come up with something that I think is a fantastic resource, why wouldn't I share that with other people who are either teaching the same training or teaching a different training and say, look, I found this resource. I think it would be helpful to you as well. So part of cultivating a culture of learning is also cultivating a culture of knowledge share. And you heard me mention that earlier. Sharing resources is a big part of that. Part of the whole picture is making sure that everyone is invested in learning and throughout the whole entire organization, not just in the specific piece that they're presenting. So we want to encourage that sharing of resources, sharing of knowledge, sharing of our own professional development, and making sure that we're sharing across the board. We share resources. We also are standardizing. So if one person has created this great resource that's all about how to navigate this learning platform and we share it across, everyone has had the exact same experience then and it's been standardized. The other thing is that creating consistency. So we need to always create a predictable pattern and structure to any training program that we're offering. Again, we don't want people to get lost in trying to figure out what's happening and what's going to happen next. We want them to get immersed into the content. And so if we're using technology and technology becomes a barrier for people, learning isn't happening. And if we're doing face-to-face, but navigating to the face-to-face location and getting through the schedule and knowing what to do is a barrier, then learning isn't happening. So if we start to create a predictable structure and pattern that all of our trainings follow, it's much easier for people. It's also really important because that's a key component to creating an accessible learning environment. We want to have a predictable structure and pattern so that people who are mobility impaired or visually impaired, hearing impaired, or have or are neurodiverse, they know what to expect. They know where they're going to find resources, and people don't have to try to figure that out every time. So consistency really promotes that success, the completion of things, it promotes the accessibility. And that's really what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to make sure that people are successful, they're completing our training programs, and that it's fully accessible to everyone. Because remember, we are teaching diverse learners in our training programs, and we aren't going to know what people's unique needs are. I didn't put it on a slide here, but I did want to mention it. I was thinking of it this morning. There are some really great tools out there, and I wanted to put out the term gamification, which I know some people love and some really just don't want to hear about it. But there are some pretty good resources and studies out there now that show that a little bit of a gamification, like an incentive gamification plan or program, really does promote engagement in our corporate learning environment. And it doesn't have to be anything big. So there are lots of different programs that can link with your training system. So if you are using something online, like a learning management system, there are some pretty cool products like Incently or Motivate, where you can create places for people to earn coins or incentives. And the incentives could be something like a preferred parking spot or a corporate, tumbler, so that they have something to drink their tea or coffee out of. And that has a twofold benefit. One, it gets people engaged, but two, it helps people to it helps with brand awareness and brand buy-in. So when people feel like, look, I got this cup from work, it's a pretty cool cup, and they're carrying it around, other people see your brand, but that person is actually starting to make a connection to that brand and to that company. And so think about some of those too. Never hurts to incentivize things a little bit. I think we are right about at time. And if we have time for any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And if not, thank you all for joining me today. It's really been my pleasure to be here with you. And I hope that you enjoyed this session. Be sure to connect with me if you'd like to. I had my email up there on that first slide, and you can find me on LinkedIn. It is Amy E. Tessitore on LinkedIn. Thank you all so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Amy, for joining us and sharing, sharing about what you're doing. So I think that we do have a question here. So Luis, you are asking fantastic questions all day today. So thank you for being here and asking great questions. And I look forward to the questions that you're going to ask tomorrow. One of the companies that I see as a good example where learning is a core value in the US is Zappos. I'm actually wearing shoes from Zappos right now. At Zappos, learning not only is one of its 10 core values, but is truly put into practice. Could you share another example?
Sure. There are a couple of them. Some are less well received than others, but for example, Google puts a lot of emphasis on learning as well, and so they've really created this culture of learning. In part, they had at one point a chief educational evangelist. That was actually a title there, and it really showed how important education was to them, not just in the products that they produced, but internally as well. There are others. Starbucks is an example of an organization that promotes learning as one of a core value in many ways. They often will close places to have corporate-wide training, particularly in response to something. If there's an incident that the company feels does not represent them as a brand, it's not part of their corporate value, they've been known to shut the entire organization down for a day and bring everyone in for a corporate training event. But they also provide extensive incentives to people to further their education outside of work. And that's the other part to remember. We can create the best corporate training environment in the world, but we also need to make sure that people know we value their outside education. We can train in terms of our specific little ecosystem, but there's so much more that people can learn outside of our organization by making connections. And so when we are like people like Starbucks or other companies like that, where we provide generous, tuition incentives, or even if it's time, we give people time to take classes, that really does help to promote that idea that we are really invested in learning no matter where it happens.
Absolutely. That's a great example. Yeah, I love that. And really putting that in the title. And many times whenever people speak about that investment, we're talking about money, but you're talking about time. You're talking about reiterating this in so many layers within the culture for that impact.
Yep.
Alexandra asks, yeah, she said fantastic holistic view. Lots to think about. Do you have any hints around communicating learning and development goals in order to engage our audience? Great question, Alexandra.
That is a great question. So, I can speak just from what we do at Open LMS. So, obviously, we are in the business of ed tech, but we're also really a lot of people who came from education. So, we just call ourselves, we're a bunch of like education nerds. We love to learn and we love to talk about learning. And one of the things that we do is we tend to have quarterly goals, right? So as a corporation, we have a quarterly goal. And so let's say that that goal for this quarter is all about video technology, what tools are out there. But we don't stop there. We talk about why that's important within, why it's important for us to learn about them, and we start to share some things that we can loop back to some of our corporate goals. So if one of our corporate goals is to be one of the best ed tech teams in the world, we can't do that if we don't know about video technology, but we also need to learn about video technology. So perhaps we have that corporate goal, we loop it back to one of our core tenets, and then we say, and here are some different things. Here's some quick tips and tools. And those are usually created by people within. My colleague, Michael Vaughn, has created this amazing support for that, for video specifically. And it's called How to Make a Really Terrible Video. And it's all about the things that we do poorly to make video. And that was shared as part of that. So it was not just something that we made client facing, but we internalized it as well. So we try to link things back into quarterly or monthly goals. It comes out in our newsletter. We link it back to one of our corporate goals. And then we try to give people a resource. So they start to see that everything starts to thread together.
I love that. Yeah, that's fantastic. How to make a terrible video. Wonderful. Well, I think that fantastic questions, everyone. If you have further questions for Amy and what she is doing, Habiba has put her LinkedIn information into the chat. So please reach out to her and continue the conversation.
Yes. All right.
Thank you so much, Amy, for taking time out of your Thursday morning to come and join us and share about what you're doing at Open LMS.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and best wishes as you go to a few more sessions today.
Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks. Bye.